All right, so let's get started. We're going to start with some terminology. I know you guys have seen these vocab words because we went over them together in earlier lessons, but we are going to use fancier notation today when it comes to these terms. So our two big things today are x-intercept and y-intercept. And we know that an x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis, and a y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, so if we look at our example on the right side of our screen, our x-intercept, where it crosses the x-axis, here's our x. Our line is crossing at this point. That point right there would be our x-intercept. Okay. Up top, we have our y-axis. Our y-axis is always the one that goes straight up and down. The point crossing that line is our y-intercept. Okay. Now, hopefully this is something you feel pretty comfy cozy with. However, like I said, we're going to get a little fancier with it. Before, when I asked you for your y-intercept, you could always tell me, oh, the y-intercept is 2. Okay, great. Now we're going to kick it up a notch. Instead of just giving me one number, you are going to give me an ordered pair for each of these. Okay, now what I'm about to write in the margin is something you definitely want to write down. So our x-intercept, instead of just giving me one number, you're going to give me an ordered pair. And the way we're going to write that, we're going to put whatever number it crosses the x at in the x's spot. Any ideas what we might write in the y's place? Amara, Caitlin, yes, 0 in the y's place. Good. So let's translate that over to this graph on the right-hand side. We know that this spot is our x-intercept. So when I'm writing, instead of just writing, oh wait, I gotta count, sorry. It's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Instead of just writing our x-intercept as 8, what we're gonna write is we're gonna write 8, comma, 0 for that point. Okay. And then our y-intercept is going to be structured the same. It's just kind of flip-flopped. So since it's the y-intercept, this time our number is going to go in the y's place, and 0 is going to go in the x's place. So again, let's switch back to that right-hand side. And let's look at our example here. I know that this spot is my y-intercept. However, instead of just saying 8 as my y-intercept, I'm going to give it an ordered pair. And since it's at positive 8 on our y-axis, I'm going to put 8 in the y's place and 0 in the x's place. So you'll notice that your x-intercept and your y-intercept look very similar here. They've just switched places. Your number of the spot it crosses at is in whatever variable you're talking about. Spot. That was a clunky way of saying it, but I hope you guys get it. Are there questions about the fancy notation we're going to use today? All right, JJ's feeling good. I think the silence is a good indication that the rest of us are feeling good. Maddie's feeling good. All right, then we are gonna cruise on to our next slide. Here we go. All right, now today we're not just gonna look at graphs and identify these intercepts though. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna give you an equation and you guys are gonna have to solve for the intercepts. And there's a specific way of doing that. If I want to find the x-intercept of an equation, our trick that we're going to do, we're going to plug in 0 for y. Okay, now what I'm writing down, you're definitely going to want to write these two things down. If you are, for whatever reason, writing this on a separate sheet of paper, these two things are your most important things on the screen today. Okay, so if we want to find the x-intercept, we have to plug in a 0 for y. But why would we do that? Well, let's go back to that other slide really quick. I'll come back in a moment. Here, for our x-intercept, you'll notice that our y value is 0. Okay, so, and our y value we know is always going to be 0 when we're talking about an x-intercept. So if we just plug in a 0 for y and solve, we can figure out what this other number should be. So that's the ideology behind this method, okay? So if we want to find an x-intercept, we plug in a 0 for y. If we want to find a y-intercept, we're going to plug in a 0 for, what do you think? Yeah, thank you. We're going to plug in a 0 for x. Lots of you in the chat. Good job. And again, those top two things are the most important today. Okay, over in the margin, I want to remind you, and I know that this is a silly reminder, but first thing, remember parentheses. So when we plug in our 0, we're not just going to put 0, we're going to put parentheses around it. The second thing I want to remind you of, and this is the one that's more silly because I know you guys know this, but we are going to use this fact quite a bit today, is that anything multiplied by 0 equals 0, which again, I know you know, but we're going to use it a lot. Give everybody a moment to make sure they have those things down before we get to our first example. All right, so our first example, we have y equals 3x plus 6 as our equation. And we want to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Okay, now just by looking at this equation, can anybody tell me what the y-intercept is? Just by looking at it. Think about our prior knowledge. Yes, Maddie, you say 6. Can you turn on your mic and explain to me how you knew that?
Because it's in y equals mx plus b form, and then the 3 is the slope, but after the plus is the b, so the b is the 6.
Yeah, good. Thank you. You can turn off your mic now. So 6 is our y-intercept. However, I want to check that with the method that we're learning today. And now, obviously, you guys know that we could find the y-intercept without using this method. However, when it comes to our further examples, we are going to need it. Okay, so just trust me, all right? Trust the process. So if we want to find our y-intercept, our rule says to plug in 0. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Our rule says to plug in 0 for x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my equation, but everywhere I see an x, I'm going to put a 0 in its spot. And you'll notice I put parentheses there. 3 parentheses 0 is very different from just 3 0. That would be 30. All right, then 3 times 0 is just 0. Because these are like terms, we can combine them. And 0 plus 6 just gives us 6. So we just confirmed what Maddie told us by using another method. We know that the y-intercept is 6 here. And if we wanted to write it fancy with our new notation, remember, we're going to put 6 in the y's place. What do we put in the x's place? Remind me. Oh, lots of you guys coming in with that answer. Look at you go. Yes, 0 in the x's place. Okay, so that would be our y-intercept. Our x-intercept is going to look a little bit trickier now. For our x-intercept, we're using that first rule here, which is to plug in a 0 for y. So I'm going to rewrite my equation again. I'm just looking at this equation up there. But instead of y, I'm going to put a 0 in its place. Now you could put the parentheses in this scenario. However, because 0 is the only thing on the left side, we really don't need the parentheses in this part. I know, I say as I break my own rule. All right, and now our goal is to solve for x. Do I have a brave soul that wants to try and solve for x here? It's a third wheel situation. Sure, Amara, yeah.
So you have to do opposite operations. So you're going to minus 6 on both sides.
Good.
Then you would end up rewriting it, and it would be -6 equals 3x. Then
Awesome, keep
after
going.
that, you are going to divide by 3 on each side.
So what's my final answer then?
-2 equals x.
Killed it. Thank you so much, Amara. Good job. And then remember, we're going to write our answer fancy. Can the rest of you hear me? Okay, I don't know why Google Meet does that sometimes, JJ. Just log out and log back in. I don't know why it does that. Oh, I say as he can't hear me. Jeez, oh Pete's. Okay. So then when we write our answer, remember we're going to put -2 in the x's place, and we just fill in the other spot with a 0. And this would be our x-intercept. All right, can I get a thumbs up, thumbs down, sideways, good, bad, eh? Tell me how you're feeling. Couple goods, a few eh. Okay, all right, I'll take it. Well, good news is we're going to go through some more examples. Now, I don't feel like I need to go through every example because I think that that would just be overkill. However, I do want to go through number 2 with you guys because we have a pesky little fraction there, and I know how much you guys love fractions. All right, so our goal here is to find the x and the y-intercept of each equation. I don't care which one we solve for first. You guys have a preference, x or y? All right, Maddie says y, so let's do it. Now, if you're going back to our previous lessons, we should already know that our answer needs to be -8. However, we're going to check that using our method from today. So remember, I'm just going to write it in the margin so we remember our rules. If we're solving for the y-intercept, we're going to plug in a 0 for x. And if we're solving for an x-intercept, we're going to plug in a 0 for the y. All right, so I'm solving for the y-intercept first, we decided. So according to my rule, that means that I'm going to plug in 0 for my x. So I'm going to write y equals 1/2 times 0 minus 8. And we know from that fact that I reminded you guys about that anything times 0 is just 0. So I'm going to write y equals 0 minus 8. Because these are like terms, I can combine them and I get y equals -8. Gracie, do you know how I would write my answer if I get y equals -8? How would I write that the proper way?
You would do 0, -8. And
beautiful. Thank you. I love it. Okay, and that is our ordered pair for the y-intercept. All right. For our x-intercept, remember, I'm going to say this till I'm blue in the face today. If we're solving for an intercept, you plug in 0 for the opposite variable. So I'm solving for x-intercept. I'm going to plug in a 0 for the y, right? So for my x, I'm going to rewrite this. I'm going to put a 0 in y's place. And I'm going to work through most of this because we're going to get scared in a moment. Make sure everybody they're down. All right, so I have to solve for x. That means my first step is adding 8 on both sides. That's my third wheel. I got to get rid of it. And now I have 8 equals 1/2 x. And here's where we have an internal panic attack because we know that to solve for x, our last step, we're going to have to divide by a fraction. Dun, dun, dun. So we're going to have to divide by 1/2, which freaks most of us out. Okay. Does anybody remember the rule for dividing by fractions, what we have to do? This is something you would have learned way back in the day. Oh my gosh, I like the little rhyme here. Yeah, we got to flip the fraction and multiply. So we are going to, and let's write that down just to remind us. If we're dividing by a fraction, we're going to flip it and then multiply. So 8 divided by 1/2 is actually going to now become 8 times 2/1. And now ideally we want 2 fractions when we're multiplying. 8 is not a fraction, but we can make it into one. Does anybody remember how I make it into a fraction? Yeah, we throw a 1 under it. Oh my gosh, so many. Wow, yay. You guys got it. Yes, we're going to put a 1 under it. So now we multiply the tops, multiply bottoms. Our numerator, 8 times 2 is 16. And our denominator, 1 times 1 is just 1. So our answer here would be 16/1 or just 16. That one's probably the hardest one we're going to do today. I'm just warning you. Okay, then my final answer I'm going to write as 16, comma, 0, because it's an x-intercept. What questions do we have at this point? All right, then let's go on to the next example because these look a little bit different. These are not in the form y equals mx plus b. The x part was just kind of confusing in general. Yeah, the x's tend to be trickier in the y equals mx plus b form. It's just like a third wheel situation. The fraction one was just trickier than we're used to. Sorry. I love fractions. I know you guys don't, but maybe one day you will grow to love them. Okay, like I said, our next couple examples, these are not in slope-intercept form. These are in standard form. So that's the ax plus by equals c. Okay, however, we're still going to use the same rules. So we're still just going to remember, and I'm just writing this on the side so we remember. For our y-intercept, we plug in a 0 for x. For our x-intercept, we plug in a 0 for y. Int is for intercept, by the way, in case you didn't catch that. All right, and this is one of those situations where before we could just look at the problem and decide what the y-intercept was. Now we can't do that. We have to solve for both. Sorry. So there was a method to my madness. I told you there was a reason. And again, I'm not going to do all of these. I'm going to skip down to number 5. All right. Let's hear from JJ. Can you turn on your mic? Once I see the little dots, I'll ask you your question. JJ? I cannot hear you. Your mic's. Oh no. So many tech issues. I don't know if he's coming back. We'll give him like 10 seconds and then I'll call on somebody else. All right, that's fine. Ileana. Oh, wait. JJ?
Hello?
It worked. Hey. JJ, do you want to solve for the x and y intercept? There's no wrong answer.
You said what?
What?
You said what?
You want to solve for the x or the y intercept? You get to choose.
X.
X-intercept. Okay, so JJ, if we want to solve for the x-intercept, what do we need to do? What's our rule say to do?
You need multiply by the y x factor, right?
Look at what I'm highlighting.
Oh, 0 going to y.
Yeah, we got to plug in a 0 for our y. So I'm going to rewrite my equation. Oh, I did it wrong. 3x minus 2 times 0 now equals 12. Hey, JJ, 2 times 0, what is that?
That's 2.
What?
Hey, that's 0.
There you go. It's 0. Thanks. You can turn off your mic. I'm done torturing you. Okay. So anything times 0 is just 0. So what's going to happen here now? If we were in class, normally what I would do is I would like cover it up and I would say, well, it's 0. So it basically is just gone away. And what I would do is I would cover up this term. Okay. However, we're not in class, so I'm just going to scribble it so you guys kind of get that effect that since 2 times 0 is just 0, it doesn't matter if we added or subtracted. It's not going to change anything. So really, once we do that, this term kind of gets eliminated. And then we're just left with 3x equals 12. And then this is a one-step equation that we know how to do. 3x equals 12. All we got to do is divide by 3 on both sides. And we're just going to get x equals 4. Okay, and when we write our answer, since this is the x-intercept, we're going to put that in the x spot and a 0 in the y spot. Let's hear from, who else should I pick on? Keandre, I'm going to pick on you. Now I want to find my y-intercept. Do you think you can talk me through it? You got to just turn on the mic, yeah.
Okay. I think you would set it up the same way, but the x where it's supposed to be x, you put the 0 right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to set that up. Now, what do you think I would do after here?
You would cross out the 3.
Yeah, thank you, Keandre. You're good. So here, because 3 times 0 is just 0, we can pretty much cross off unless you want to finish up this problem.
Yeah.
Sure, let's do it. Now what?
Do you do 2y divided by 12?
You're so close. What'd you forget?
Uh,
The sign. It's not just a 2.
I said divide.
Yeah, we're going to divide by what? You said divide by 2. It's not just 2.
Oh, 12.
No, negative 2, Keandre. You were so close.
Negative 2?
There we go. You got it. Do you have a final answer for me, or you want me to go for it?
6.
-6. Yes. Good job, Keandre. All right. I'm done torturing you. You're good. So then for our final answer, we're going to put -6 in the y's place and 0 in the x's place. So that was an example with standard form. Okay. Can you guys throw me a good, bad, Oh, sorry, you can't. The chat's not on. Now it is. Good, bad? How are we feeling? Remember that if you miss anything, this will be posted at the end of the day, so you can always come back to it. All right, judging by the silence, I'm going to move on to our very last slide of the day, because what is this all good for? Okay, first things first, I will on an assessment just ask you to find the intercepts. That is a straight question that's going to happen. However, I will also ask you to graph in standard form. Now, what we did last week, if you were given something like this, what you did is you solved for y, got it in the form y equals mx plus b, and then graphed it. And that is a perfectly valid way of doing it. However, now that we have this method of solving for intercepts, we can also graph it this way. Okay, so we're going to have two methods in our arsenal after this. Right, so I'm going to solve this pretty quickly because I know you guys are getting sick of it. If I go too fast, though, tell me to slow down. I'm just going to pick my y-intercept. We know that we have to plug in a 0 for x, so I'm going to do -4 times 0 plus 5y equals 20. And remember, anything times 0 is just 0, so this really goes away. And then I'm left with 5y equals 20. So our last step here, we would divide by 5. And then we'd be left with 20 divided by 5, which is 4. And we know since it's the y-intercept, we're going to put that in the y's place. Now, let's think about what this would look like on a graph. We just found the y-intercept. By definition, the y-intercept is where the line is going to cross the y-axis. So here's our y-axis, straight up and down the vertical one. Since we know it's supposed to cross at 4, we can now put a dot at 4. And then we can't just graph a line based on one dot. You need at least 2. So if we need 2, let's solve for the other intercept. Here we go. So now I want to solve for my x-intercept. That's the other one I need. And we know by our rule we're going to put a 0 in for y. So now I'm going to have -4x plus 5 times 0 equals 20. Like we talked about before, because we multiplied by 0, we can really just cross that off. And we have -4x equals 20. If we divide by -4, I know I'm running out of room here. We're going to get x equals -5. And we would write our answer as -50 to be all fancy. So we found our y-intercept and we plotted it on the y-axis. We just found our x-intercept. Let's plot it on the x-axis. We know we're going to cross at -5, so I'll put a dot at -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now that I have those two lines, I can connect my dots. And I have my other way of graphing with standard form. Ooh, ah. All right, I'm going to stop our recording here.